You are a Roman senator, draped in a toga, heavy with the purple stripe of noble birth. The marble steps of the Palatine Hill rise before you, glowing pale in the torchlight, and yet every step upward makes your chest feel heavier, as if unseen chains drag at your feet. You have been summoned, no, commanded, to attend a gathering hosted by the Emperor himself. It should be the highest honor of your career. And yet, as you approach those towering bronze doors, your stomach coils with dread. The guards who flank the entrance avoid your eyes, their silence louder than any warning. The fragrance of incense hangs thick, but it cannot mask something else in the air, a suffocating heaviness, as if the very palace walls know the darkness that unfolds within. And then you hear it, a laugh, not the warm, booming laugh of a man delighted with life, but the high, jagged laughter of someone who sees the world not as a home, but as a toy, something to break at will. Emperor Caligula enters, his silk garments shimmering like molten gold, his gaze sharp and fever bright. With a clap of his hands, he proclaims to the assembly, "Tonight, we shall see who among you truly loves your emperor." From that moment on, Rome's most sacred halls of governance would begin to twist into something else entirely. They would no longer be the seat of order, but a stage for the emperor, us darkest appetites. This is the story of how Caligula, the boy who once charmed an empire, grew into a ruler whose reign is remembered not for law or legacy, but for a descent into psychological terror so profound that it shook Rome to its very foundations. But to understand how a man could transform the center of the world's greatest empire into a theater of fear, you must first understand the child who would become that man. Gaius Julius Caesar Augustus Germanicus was born in 12th of CE, the cherished son of Germanicus, Rome's beloved general, and Agrippina the Elder, a woman of impeccable lineage. His childhood nickname, Caligula, meant little boots, a term of affection given by the soldiers who adored the sight of the boy marching about in miniature military gear. To the legionaries, he was a symbol of hope and continuity, the son of their heroic commander. To Rome, he was a bright star of promise. But Rome is rarely kind to its children, and even less so to the children of power. By the time Caligula was 7 years old, that bright promise had curdled into dread. His father died suddenly under suspicious circumstances. Poison, many whispered, ordered by Emperor Tiberius himself. One by one, Caligula's family members vanished. His mother and brothers were exiled, imprisoned, and destroyed by the paranoid machinery of imperial politics. Imagine being a boy and knowing that each knock at the door might mean death. Imagine learning that survival depended not on trust, but on performance, on wearing the right mask. Caligula became a master of deception, concealing his thoughts behind a harmless smile. To the outside world, he was the charming youth. Inside, though, his soul hardened, his heart learning early that safety could only be purchased through the humiliation of others. When Tiberius finally died in 37 CE, Rome exhaled in relief. They had endured decades under a ruler whose paranoia had turned the empire into a nest of whispers and executions. And so, when the 24-year-old Caligula was raised to the throne, the city erupted in joy. He was the son of Germanicus, the boy adored by the legions. Surely, he would restore Rome's dignity. For a time, he seemed to. He recalled political exiles, granted rewards to the Praetorian Guard, and hosted grand spectacles for the people. His reign began in a blaze of generosity and celebration. Rome believed again. But then something happened. In the closing months of 37 CE, Caligula fell gravely ill. Ancient writers describe it as a fever that nearly carried him into death's arms. For days, the empire teetered on the brink of chaos, awaiting news of their young ruler. When he finally recovered, Rome rejoiced, but those closest to him began to notice the change. Something had shifted in his mind. Some claimed the fever burned away his reason. Others said it simply released the darkness that had always been there, waiting. The careful mask was gone. At first, it showed in small things, extravagant spending, peculiar decisions, strange demands whispered within the palace walls. But behind the marble doors, something darker was unfolding. Caligula had discovered the most intoxicating truth of absolute power. He could do anything, and no one could stop him. The transformation was gradual, like ink spreading across parchment. A demand here, a humiliation there. Servants long loyal to the imperial family found themselves ordered into bizarre games, their dignity stripped in an instant. Senators, families, received invitations to gatherings that began as elegant dinners but ended in spectacles that left even Rome a hardened elite shaken. What unsettled Rome most was not simply the acts themselves, but the deliberate way Caligula used them. He was not chasing pleasure, he was orchestrating fear. Every command, every humiliation, every performance inside those palace walls was designed to remind Rome, its most powerful men and women, that their status, their dignity, even their very lives depended entirely on his whim. For Rome, the palace was supposed to be a sanctuary of order. Under Caligula, it became something else. The marble halls, the frescoed chambers, the sprawling courtyards, all of it turned into a stage upon which the emperor rehearsed his philosophy of terror. He blurred the lines between politics and theater, between worship and performance, until no Roman could tell where governance ended and nightmare began. One evening, senators were invited with their families for what was promised to be a dignified feast. The tables were laden with delicacies, the air thick with music, and then, with that jagged laugh, Caligula shifted the night's course. What followed was no longer a feast, but a trial, a test of loyalty that twisted the sacred bonds of family into shackles of fear. To resist was to die, to comply was to lose oneself forever, and so silence filled the hall, heavy and suffocating, as Rome's proudest citizens learned that in the emperor's presence, honor was an illusion. This is the horror of Caligula, not simply the stories of excess whispered through history, but the deeper, more corrosive truth. He understood the psychology of power. He wielded fear not only to command obedience, but to break the human spirit itself by dragging Rome's noblest into situations they could never escape. He ensured that they could never again rise against him. Every stone of the palace seemed to absorb that terror. The laughter of the emperor echoed through the halls, mingling with the silence of those who dared not breathe too loudly. And with each gathering, each night of dread, the line between Rome's government and the emperor's personal theater blurred further. And yet, even in the midst of this darkness, the people of Rome continued to cheer. They still filled the arenas, still tossed laurel wreaths before his chariot. They saw the games, the gifts, the spectacle. Few dared to look behind the marble walls to see the truth that their emperor was not restoring Rome, but unraveling it. Before we step further into this descent, before we unearth the most haunting stories of what took place inside those walls, let me pause for a moment, because if you are still with me, walking those dark corridors in your mind, you are one of us, someone who dares to face the shadows of history rather than look away. If you value uncovering these hidden, unsettling truths, consider subscribing. It helps me keep bringing you stories that the history books often bury, and it ensures we continue this journey together, no matter how grim the path becomes. When Caligula's madness reached deeper into the lives of Rome's most powerful, the palace itself began to change. Rooms were remodeled into stages. Chambers became arenas not of politics, but of performance. Senators, once tasked with shaping law, now found themselves trapped in spectacles meant to strip them of all dignity. Even Rome's most sacred rituals were not spared. Ceremonies that had once carried centuries of tradition were twisted into something unrecognizable, leaving priests, generals, and aristocrats alike uncertain whether they were participants in religion or pawns in a cruel game. Each night seemed to push further. Each command grew bolder. The emperor's laugh grew sharper, louder, as if the sound itself fed upon the discomfort of his subjects. Those who attended these gatherings left hollow-eyed, yet bound by silence, for to speak of what they had seen was to invite ruin. And still, the palace doors opened, again and again. Invitations arrived like summons, heavy with dread. Families who refused disappeared, and so the marble steps of the Palatine Hill became a place where hope died, where the most honored citizens of Rome climbed upward, knowing only fear awaited them. In time, the stories spread beyond the palace walls. Whispers moved through the city like shadows at dusk. No one spoke openly, but all knew that something had shifted. The emperor was no longer the young man of promise, but a figure of unease, his name a weight carried with caution. And then came the changes that no whisper could soften, the transformation of ritual itself. Senate meetings no longer felt like governance, but like theater directed by a merciless hand. Religious festivals twisted into performances that left Rome's people unsure whether they were witnessing worship or something darker. It was as though Caligula had discovered that the true power of fear was not in private acts, but in the corruption of the sacred. By bending rituals, he bent Rome's very soul, and once he discovered that power, he would not stop. By the time Caligula's reign had matured, the Palatine Hill Palace was no longer merely the residence of Rome's emperor. It had become an extension of his mind, a labyrinth of grandeur and dread, where the walls themselves seemed to breathe with anticipation of what would unfold next. Those who entered these halls carried a weight heavier than their own mortality. Even the most seasoned senators, men who had faced armies and treachery, found themselves unsettled in ways that no battlefield could teach. The air seemed charged with the electric tension of unspoken commands. Every whisper could be an order, every glance a verdict. To survive here was to read the invisible rules, to anticipate the emperor's desires before they were spoken. Failure was not an option. Caligula's fascination with control had evolved into something almost surgical in its precision. It was no longer merely about domination or spectacle. It was about creating a system of psychological pressure so intricate that every citizen of Rome, whether directly in the palace or far away, could feel its shadow. Senators' families were the first to understand this invisible reach. Invitations to the emperor's gatherings were never optional. To decline was to court ruin, and so they arrived, carrying a facade of composure while their hearts beat in synchronized fear. Inside, every decision Caligula made, every gesture, every calculated pause, was designed to test limits. Rome's noblest lived in a constant state of tension, their minds straining to predict whims they could neither understand nor resist. And it was in this environment that Caligula revealed his most unsettling talent, the ability to turn ordinary events into instruments of unease. A banquet could last for hours, yet each moment was punctuated with subtleties meant to unsettle the senses. The emperor would make trivial requests, small experiments to see how the powerful responded under pressure. Was a senator's hand steady when asked to pour wine? Did a matron's eyes betray fear when asked an ambiguous question? These were not games of amusement. They were exercises in submission, drills in the art of obedience, tests that left witnesses questioning their own judgment and morality. The psychological landscape of the palace was vast and dark. Private corridors became stages for elaborate maneuvers of power. Servants and attendants moved like shadows, careful never to attract notice unless summoned. And when summoned, the stakes were always clear. Caligula's influence reached even into moments meant for rest or reflection. A whispered command could upend a household, turning loyalty into terror and familiarity into suspicion. The palace became a theater of perpetual anticipation, and the inhabitants were trapped performers, forever dancing to the rhythm of a mind that measured power with precision and cruelty. Yet the emperor's actions were never arbitrary. Each display of power, each unsettling spectacle, had layers of intent. Caligula understood that fear, like fire, could be both destructive and illuminating. It revealed the true nature of those around him. He could discern loyalty from deceit, courage from hubris, simply by observing reactions. This level of scrutiny left no one untouched. Those who survived the palace's gaze carried invisible scars, their decisions and alliances forever shaped by the subtle terror they had endured. Rome itself became complicit in the palace's atmosphere, as distant governors, soldiers, and administrators were forced to mirror the culture of intimidation that the emperor cultivated within his walls. In the midst of this climate, Caligula's personal rituals grew increasingly elaborate. What once may have been private indulgences now transformed into exercises of symbolic control. Every room, every corridor, every ceremonial space within the palace became a site of influence, a way to demonstrate that the emperor's reach was absolute. Even the most sacred traditions were not immune. Religious ceremonies, previously shielded by centuries of reverence, were now reframed to assert imperial supremacy. Those who performed these rituals were subtly reminded of the hierarchy in which they existed. Even a minor misstep in timing, in posture, in gesture, could provoke a correction that left the participant shaken and uncertain. In this way, Caligula extended his dominion beyond the physical into the psychological, shaping the minds of those around him with invisible chains. And yet, amidst all this orchestrated dread, Caligula's empire was still outwardly functioning. Rome's streets remained bustling, its markets filled, and its festivals continued. On the surface, life seemed normal. The danger was not in overt chaos, but in the quiet knowledge that within the heart of power, sanity, and morality were fragile, and obedience was extracted not by law alone, but through invisible terror. Every decision by the emperor had ripple effects, shaping policies, alliances, and even the moral compass of Rome itself. Citizens might never enter the palace, but the echo of its influence stretched across the empire. At the center of it all was the emperor himself, a man whose brilliance in political calculation was inseparable from his fascination with psychological manipulation. He understood the fragility of human pride and exploited it to cement his dominion. Those who attempted subtle defiance found themselves isolated, disoriented, their positions weakened. Those who acquiesced were forever marked by the experience, carrying the invisible weight of participation. Power, in Caligula's hands, became both tool and punishment, a force that reshaped the human spirit itself. And here is where the tragedy deepens. The palace was not merely a physical structure, but a crucible in which human nature was tested against the extremes of fear and submission. It produced individuals who were cautious, silent, and perpetually calculating. It fostered an atmosphere where trust was impossible, and yet appearances demanded loyalty. In this environment, the line between courage and folly, between honor and self preservation, became almost meaningless. Midway through this descent, if you are still walking these corridors in your mind, pause and reflect. The stories of Rome's elite are more than whispers. They are lessons in the fragility of order and morality. If you wish to continue exploring these shadowed histories and understand how power can warp not only individuals, but entire societies, consider subscribing. By joining, you remain part of this journey into the hidden, unsettling truths that history often buries, ensuring that the voices of the past continue to reach the present. Caligula's influence extended even further, reshaping not only individuals, but social systems themselves. Institutions that had once been grounded in law, custom, or religious tradition became tools for the assertion of personal dominance. Advisors and senators learned that policies could be shaped not only by reason, but by the silent threat emanating from the throne. Governance became intertwined with the emperor's whims, and the state functioned simultaneously as a machine of administration and a theater of psychological exploration. Rome's citizens, aware or unaware, were drawn into a complex web of influence that stretched from the palace corridors to the farthest provinces. Despite the terror, life outside the palace continued in its usual rhythm. Festivals, commerce, and politics went on, yet the subtle imprint of fear and influence reached every corner of the empire. Children growing up in noble families learned early to navigate the invisible hierarchies. Soldiers and governors adapted their behavior according to expectations they could never fully understand. The palace's atmosphere had become a force shaping society itself, and its lessons were absorbed with quiet compliance. Caligula, for all his excesses, demonstrated a terrifying mastery of control. He saw beyond simple obedience, reaching into the minds of those around him, shaping their decisions, desires, and perceptions. It was an empire ruled not only by law, but by subtle coercion and the persistent reminder of human vulnerability. And when Caligula finally passed from power, the psychological and societal imprint remained, echoing long after the walls of the palace had fallen silent. The story of his reign leaves us with more than tales of excess or scandal. It offers a reflection on the nature of authority, on the fragility of social bonds, and on the ways in which power can extend far beyond the obvious. Rome endured, rebuilt, and carried forward. Yet the lessons of those years remain vivid. They remind us that even in the most magnificent societies, human vulnerability, fear, and manipulation can shape history in profound and haunting ways. As we leave the marble halls of the Palatine Hill and return to the streets of Rome, the echoes of Caligula's rule linger in memory. History shows us that power unchecked, when fused with a mind both brilliant and ruthless, has consequences that stretch far beyond the individual, reaching into the collective psyche of a civilization. And while the physical structures crumble and emperors fade into legend, the shadows they cast remain, teaching us the enduring truth. Human ambition and cruelty, when combined, can leave marks that time itself cannot erase. Take a moment and consider the lives of those who lived in that palace, the silent observers, the reluctant participants, the families whose fates were intertwined with the whims of a single man. What would you have done in their place? How far could you bend before the weight of survival became indistinguishable from complicity? Share your thoughts in the comments. History's lessons are not merely for the past, they challenge us to examine courage, morality, and the subtle forces that shape the lives we lead today.